This is CBN NewsWatch.
Welcome to CBN NewsWatch. I'm Mark Martin. In Kenosha, Wisconsin today, a verdict in the Kyle Rittenhouse murder case. After more than 3 days of deliberation, the jury has acquitted the 18-year-old on all charges. Rittenhouse had pled self-defense in the 2020 shootings that killed 2 men and wounded a third. He was charged with homicide, attempted homicide, and recklessly endangering safety and could have received life in prison. In other news, after months of infighting among Democrats, the House passed President Biden's massive social spending and climate change bill this morning, all 2,100 pages. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi offered praise to her Democratic colleagues for passing the measure.
Today, we have the honor of participating in passing legislation for the people to build back better. So for us, it's about not just about legislation, it's about values and the values that this legislation represents for the people.
Overnight, Republican leader Kevin McCarthy took to the floor criticizing the bill on a wide range of issues for more than 8 hours, delaying the vote. He says it's reckless spending.
You are spending more money than we spent to solve World War II, to win it. And you're proud of it. You're championing it.
As we think of all of this progress, and it's pretty exciting. This is historic. It is transformative. It will help us build back better with women and all those who had not previously had the full advantage.
No Republicans voted for the bill. One Democrat voted no. Democrats say the measure will create free pre-K, increase child care assistance, cut drug costs for seniors, and slow climate change. But some centrist Democrats are still worried that the bill will cost more than advertised. And get complete coverage, including analysis, tonight on Faith Nation. It airs at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the CBN News Channel. PFIZER and MODERNA vaccine boosters are now authorized for all adults by the Food and Drug Administration. Previously, boosters were only allowed for anyone 65 and older who were vaccinated and for certain adults at high risk of infection or severe disease. Now the CDC Advisory Board is meeting to discuss the booster, and official sign-off could come afterwards. The U.S. average of new COVID cases is nearly 100,000 daily, according to Johns Hopkins University. In other developing news, frightening new numbers reveal a staggering increase in America's drug epidemic. The CDC reports an estimated 100,000 Americans died from overdoses in 1 year, which is a record high. As medical reporter Lori Johnson tells us, the increase is being blamed on fentanyl-laced street drugs and COVID-19 shutdowns.
From March 2020 to April 2021, more than 100,000 people, or 274 a day, died of drug overdoses in the United States. That's close to 1/3 more deaths than just the year before. Drug overdose deaths have been steadily climbing the last 20 years, but nothing like the acceleration we've seen lately. The main culprit, fentanyl, often secretly added to other drugs, catching the user off guard.
It's really just in everything, in the drug market. It's kind of a scary time.
The Virginia Medical Examiner's Office says 3/4 of overdose deaths involved fentanyl, almost all accidental.
This whole drug overdose epidemic has changed, but it's increasing significantly in the last year. And I'm not sure if we're going to really see anything slow down in the near future.
A synthetic opioid, fentanyl, is 100 times more powerful than morphine, so potent that the equivalent of a couple grains of sand can kill.
It is cheaper than many other substances, so it can be added to stretch out. If somebody has a certain amount of cocaine, for instance, if they add fentanyl, they can increase the volume at a very low cost.
It's also added to pills like Xanax, oxycodone, and Molly.
How easy is it to spot fake pills that are bought on the street?
Almost impossible. What we call a pill press is what dealers are using to take the powdered substance and turn it back into a prescription-looking pill, are incredibly sophisticated.
In addition to the fentanyl-laced street drugs, pandemic closures of rehab centers also contributed to the high number of overdoses as recovering addicts relapsed.
Then they were alone. And that isolation is the worst thing to happen for someone who struggles with substance abuse.
Some drug prevention organizations are taking action to stop future overdoses by giving known users two things: fentanyl test strips to detect the substance in other drugs, and Narcan, the opioid reversal spray. While users are also advised to use the buddy system, the #1 recommendation remains get treatment.
But we've seen a lot of people get better, mostly, and I have to be honest with you, it's through the power of Christ. When they give their life to the Lord and they say, look, God, I'm surrendering my life to you. I call it submitting to the process.
He recommends the 12-step program, which involves believing God can break the chains of addiction. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
A Connecticut school district is teaching transgenderism to kindergartners. The district's goal is to teach, quote, social emotional learning through an equity lens. National Review reports the students are being forced to take the lessons, saying district officials reportedly told parents they cannot opt out of the curriculum. Concerned parents contacted Parents Defending Education about this issue. Overseas now, 15 years after the Second Lebanon War, Israel is preparing for the next war with the Iranian-backed army HEZBOLLAH. As Chris Mitchell reports, Israel is developing tactics to both defeat HEZBOLLAH and protect civilians caught in harm's way.
In 2006, HEZBOLLAH fired nearly 4,000 rockets at Israel for more than a month, forcing Israelis to seek shelter. Today, the terror group has amassed an arsenal of some 150,000 rockets and could fire as many rockets in one day as they fired in that 34-day war.
In the ongoing week, we are exercising several scenarios against the terror organization HEZBOLLAH.
Colonel Barak Hiram says the IDF exercise is all about getting ready for the next conflict. They face a complicated battlefield and enemy.
HEZBOLLAH is targeting most of its arsenal against civilians and Israeli civil population. Secondly, is holding most of its activities embedded within the Lebanese civilians and using them as a human shield for his terror actions.
Tactics haven't changed in 15 years, although the scope is likely larger.
And we will not hesitate to take the most severe measures against those who are aiming thousands of rockets and missiles against innocent civilians for one purpose: to kill them. This is something that we will not be able to tolerate.
For years, the IDF has documented how HEZBOLLAH embeds its war machine within civilian infrastructure, like schools, hospitals, and homes. That's why Israel is preparing a state-of-the-art countermeasure. These are exclusive scenes of new IDF units called SUFA. They operate on the battlefield to direct fire at the enemy, while also protecting civilians. Using integrated touchscreens, software, and real-time intelligence, personnel synchronize air, land, and sea forces to target the enemy. HEZBOLLAH wants the IDF to miscalculate and hit the terror group's human shields. The mission of these SUFA units is to constantly check and recheck targets so civilians are not harmed. The goal: wage war, be humane, and deprive HEZBOLLAH of a propaganda victory. Military leaders expect these units will make a difference, as the next war will undoubtedly require boots on the ground.
We understand that in any scenario that will occur in the future, we will be forced to use ground forces and to maneuver inside Lebanon in order to eliminate threats against Israel and in order to protect the Israel's sovereignty and civilians all around.
At a background briefing, CBN News learned this next conflict will be known as the First Northern Front War, since HEZBOLLAH is so entrenched in both Lebanon and Syria. The IDF adds the next war will be on a bigger scale and hopefully create a new situation inside Lebanon, a scenario they hope ultimately leads to peace. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
And we'll be right back. CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell joins us now with more on the situation in Israel. Chris, as you just reported before the break, some serious concerns of war for Israel with HEZBOLLAH, the Iranian-backed terror group. Why now?
Well, I think right now, Mark, because there's increased tension with Iran, Iran's getting closer and closer to a nuclear weapon. Now, what happens now if Israel decides to strike Iran to stop their nuclear program, then what Iran could do is order HEZBOLLAH to strike Israel. Iran has been arming, training HEZBOLLAH for just such a scenario. That's why they have about 150,000 rockets. And, Mark, we found out as many as 100,000 mortars. So since 2006, the last Lebanon war, and we were up there on the border 15 years ago, both Israel and HEZBOLLAH have been preparing for the next war. So this is one way the IDF is preparing. They want to defeat HEZBOLLAH. That's their number one goal. But they also want to protect civilians. And as they told us in our briefing, they want to be humane. They wage war, but they do it in a way that maintains their morals. On the other hand, HEZBOLLAH's strategy, they want to make Israel miscalculate, hit civilians, and then they can blame Israel and get their, quote, propaganda victory. So the two different styles of warfare facing one another right now.
Chris, it's a fact HEZBOLLAH doesn't hesitate to operate in areas like Lebanon and use innocent civilians as shields. Where does the Lebanese government stand?
Well, Mark, really, the government of Lebanon, actually, some of them actually stand with HEZBOLLAH. They support HEZBOLLAH. And there are other parts of the government and the country that are dominated by HEZBOLLAH. Even if they want to protest against this terror army, they really can't do that. Right now, Lebanon is imploding economically and politically. And some would say it's a failed state, but there's other that say it's a faux or a false state, really, because HEZBOLLAH is the real power behind Lebanon right now. So it's a very dangerous situation. HEZBOLLAH is the power behind this Lebanese government, and many people here in Israel are concerned that HEZBOLLAH could actually take over the country.
And Chris, Israel is known for its technology. Do you think in part the Lord has given the nation this gift of technology to help defend his chosen people and others caught in the middle of these wars?
I would think so, and I think the answer to that, Mark, is yes, and it seems like the Lord has blessed Israel to be a light to the nations, just like the prophet Isaiah said it would be. They have sophisticated technology. We saw in this particular story, we also see that it's a startup nation that helps people all over the world. And we've seen probably the biggest technologies, the rise of Iron Dome here in the last 10 years. It's protected Israel from thousands of rockets, both from Hamas and HEZBOLLAH. It's actually saved both Israelis and Palestinians. And there's more technology being developed now for the future, like laser technology.
Is there any biblical significance of the next anticipated war?
Well, I think so. I think the trend right now, the Bible says that the nations will eventually come against Israel. The prophet Zechariah said that. I don't think this is going to be the war of Gog and Magog, but we're seeing an alliance of nations coming against Israel, Iran, Turkey, Syria, and Russia. But on the other hand, Mark, we're seeing nations that are aligning themselves with Israel, and that's part of the Abraham Accords. You can describe it like two weather fronts, one against Israel, one for Israel, and you're going to see these two weather fronts collide. It's likely to be a storm.
And quickly, almost out of time, but what's ahead on Jerusalem Dateline this week?
Well, Mark, we have an update from inside Syria with our friend Dave Eubank. He's with the Free Burma Rangers. He's talking about Muslims having dreams of Jesus. Also, an update on the Tower of David. That's a treasure of Jerusalem right there at the entrance to the Old City. That's undergoing a major renovation. And we're talking about a new mall bringing Arabs and Jews together just outside of Jerusalem. All that on this week's Jerusalem Dateline.
Interesting content there, as always. Thank you, Chris. Chris Mitchell reporting from Jerusalem. Blessings, sir. And you can see more news from the Middle East with Chris and his team on this station or on the CBN News Channel tonight at 8:30 Eastern. Coming up, NFL quarterback Cam Newton gives God thanks for being back in the game. Time now to talk sports with CBN Sports Director Sean Brown. Hey, Sean.
Hey, Mark. Good morning.
Big news recently with Cam Newton being picked up by the Carolina Panthers, the team where his NFL career started. Bring us up to speed.
Well, Mark, you may remember Cam was cut by the Panthers in March of 2020. signed by the Patriots, spent the entire season last season with the Patriots organization, and then was cut by the Patriots in August. So he had no job going into the 2021 season. Then last week, or the week before last, rather, Sam Darnold goes down, Panthers quarterback Sam Darnold goes down with an injury, and they need a quarterback. And so they called Cam the Thursday before Sunday's game against the Arizona Cardinals, the 8-1 Arizona Cardinals. He goes in and reminds everyone who Cam Newton is. I mean, he goes in 2 touchdowns and just reminds us who he is and his capability.
That's a great success story there. Sports Spectrum reports it didn't take him long to give God praise for his situation. Tell us about that.
Well, yeah, his post-game interview, he just lets everybody know, look, I just want to take this opportunity, he says, to let everyone know, whoever's watching this, God is real. He says he's just a vessel. He goes on to use the analogy, saying he was reading the story about Moses and God speaking to Moses in the desert, and then says that, hey, by the way, we're in Glendale, Arizona, which is in the desert. And so he's very aware of who Jesus is, who Jesus means to him. And sometimes, hey, look, he's saying sometimes God needs to sit you down to speak to you. And so right now he's at a very interesting place in his life, spiritually, and of course in his career.
Remind us, that is, of his background in the NFL and college.
Well, his story's interesting. I mean, it's a testament to Jeremiah 29:11. God knows the plans he has for us. Cam was at Florida. He ends up at Blinn College, which is a JUCO, goes from the JUCO school, makes it to Auburn, balls out, and then becomes the #1 draft pick by the Panthers organization. And along the way, and this has been validated, he's been walking with God the entire way, allowing God to order his steps. And sometimes we can, obviously you can kind of lose your way. But right now, he's saying that, I'm playing for an audience of one. God is real. He's the Lord of my life. And prayerfully moving forward, he can surround himself with other believers, other team leaders, so that they can kind of that iron sharpening iron to keep each other accountable. We'll have to see how the season ends.
Sean, so what do you think happens next with him, with the Panthers and the other starting quarterback?
There's going to be a quarterback battle. Cam is who he is. If he continues to stay consistent, I have no doubt he's going to win the starting job, at least for this season. He's on a 1-year contract with the Panthers organization. He's playing his old team. He's playing his old coach and Ron Rivera and the Washington football team this week. And so as long as he remains consistent, I have no doubt he's going to win the starting job. How far he's going to be able to take the team, that remains to be seen. But if he's consistent, we know of his capability. And as long as he's consistent, I'm pretty sure they'll go far into the season. But it's going to be hard because of the division that they're in. And so we'll have to see how that plays out. He still has to deal with Tom Brady. And so we'll have to see how that works out.
And Sean, quickly, we only have about 30 seconds left, but how can his story inspire others?
Well, that's a great question, Mark. God knows the plans he has for you, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, to give you hope in a future. And that's really what this is. Sometimes you can lose your way and God needs to sit you down and say, look, we need to realign your priorities here. I've got a plan for you, plans to prosper you if you would just follow me, if you would just listen to me. And so Cam had a great career. He had a moment where God sat him down. He had no job. No one wanted to sign him, including his old coach and Ron Rivera with the Washington football team. No one signed him. And there's speculation as to why, but it doesn't matter. He was sitting home eating cereal and he got the call. He realized the opportunity and he seized the moment and said, you know what, I'm not going to let this opportunity go away without acknowledging that God is real. God is with me. And prayerfully, he can just hold on to that and know that God continues to order the steps of the righteous. And so it's going to be interesting to watch. And I'm praying for him, Mark. I really am. I'm praying for him, and I wish him much success in this new phase.
That's a wonderful story. All right, Sean Brown, always good to see you. Thanks again.
You too, my friend.
All right, we'll be right back. Several movies out heading into the holiday season. I talked with movie guide's Evie Carroll about a few. Let's talk about Maya and the Three by Netflix first. Tell us what's it about.
Well, this is a concerning program because it's really geared towards the younger audience. It's Y7, which means 7 and above. And what it's about is there's this Mexican tribe with a princess, and her mother is the goddess of death. Now, if that doesn't sound concerning, I don't know what to say, but it's very dark. It's got a lot of dark imagery. It's all about death. It talks about death, and it's for the younger audience. So that's why it really concerns me.
Yeah, talk a little bit more about why parents should be concerned about this movie when many cartoons show good and evil.
Why you should be concerned in terms of this movie or this program, it's a series on Netflix, is because it's glorifying the evil. Really, it's saying the reverse, right? That the evil is good and good is nowhere to be found, right? And so it's glorifying kind of the witchcraft and the death and the goddess of death and these dark world things.
On the flip side, you say Disney's Encanto is a much better story and movie for children. Talk about it.
Yeah, so this movie is really family oriented. The lead character is in this big Latina family. She loves her family, and everybody in the family has gifts. And really, it shows that it's gifts from God. And so they're different talents in different areas. But she's still yet to discover what her gifts are. But when the family house goes under, she's the one that has to kind of save the day and save the family.
You also say that King Richard is a great story with a positive message. Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, King Richard is an amazing story. It talks about the parents of Serena and Venus Williams and how they really instilled, the passion for tennis and the passion for practice and working hard and working on your talents. And the parents were, the kids grew up in Compton. And so the parents did everything they could to help their children get out of this kind of area that had a lot of gang violence and all these things.
Would you say that this is also good for children?
No, this is really much more of a teenager and above movie. There are some heavy elements to it, like the gang violence, like I talked about, and heavy themes. But it does actually have a lot of Christian content to it. There's prayer in Jesus' name. The parents are very faith-filled, and so they instill that into their children.
All right, Evie Carroll with MovieGuide.org. Thank you so much for the reviews, Evie.
Thanks for having me.
And that's going to do it for this edition of CBN News Watch. As always, thanks for watching. Have a great weekend and a great day.